Welcome to the webinar, everyone. Our special guest today is Kathy Contreras, Research Director, Channel Marketing Services at Serious Decisions. She's joined today by our own Stephen Kellum, President of CCI, and together they're going to present the new world of channel incentives. We've also allotted time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A session, so please type any questions you have into the chat box and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will turn that over to Stephen Kellum.
Thanks, Carrie. Really appreciate it. And Kathy, thanks for joining us here this morning.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So the way that we're going to break this, oh, by the way, welcome everybody, and thank you for everybody for joining this morning. I know everybody's got busy schedules, so we really want to make sure that we provide you guys some good content today. And we're going to start off, we're going to break this out into two sections. The first section is really around the basics. What are the best practices that everybody really needs to use to have a successful program? And that goes from everything from how do you onboard someone to what do you need to look for to really looking at the measurement of the ROIs. And then the second section I think is going to be really interesting. I'm sure everybody who's been in the channel and most of our listeners today has seen all the changes that have taken place over the past couple years. And we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about what the new incentive landscape really looks like and how to make the most out of the resources that you have today. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Kathy and let her get it started.
Thank you, Stephen. I think it's really important. One of the things we spend a lot of time supporting our clients on is really looking at their MDF programs and their co-op programs. They come to us often wanting to know what best practices are, really to solve the problems or challenges they're experiencing. So I thought we'd start there to really look at what are some of the common challenges we see and really put our focus around, what does that mean and why is that the case? And in terms of the ROI optimization of MDF and co-op funds, a lot of times the challenge actually is in the partner organization themselves. They often aren't set up with marketing resources, whether that be a marketing team or dedicated staff, or even the tools or technologies required to do modern marketing. In addition, if there is a team or dedicated staff focused on marketing, they may not have the latest, greatest expertise. You think about digital marketing, you think about customer marketing, even areas of marketing expertise, account-based marketing, etc. The question is whether or not they really have that capability, that skill set, and that experience on their bench. Another challenge we often see is the complexity of the process itself. So how easy is it to do business with the suppliers in terms of these programs and these funds? A lot of times the cost and time that's required is actually not worth the reward for the partner, and so they'll tend not to engage in these programs. And then finally, even if all of these things are in place, is it really clear to the partner what they get from the opportunity, what they get from engaging, what they get back from their investment in time and resources? And so these are areas that we identify as common challenges across the board.
Kathy, we see a lot of the same thing. I think this is a really good list. It's a great place for people to do a gut check on what they have. It's really interesting. We do a lot of surveys. I know you guys do surveys too. The simplicity piece comes up over and over again from partners. It's the number one thing partners ask for every single survey that we do globally. So that number three piece, the complexity of the process, I think that's really key. And then the other three items that you have there, I think the good news is that the vendors that we talk to on a regular basis really recognize and are recognizing that partners aren't very good marketers, and that what's going on out there with the buyer's journey and what is being required of the partners really requires the vendors to invest with those partners and help augment the lack of resources and the lack of skills. And whether that's doing it themselves or, as you said, looking at providing maybe a third party. And then also the last point I think is really good, how do we incent them to actually then engage with everything that's been created?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. One of our best practices that we recommend is really defining for partners. Again, when we do Serious Decisions supports thousands of clients, a lot of those are marketing experts. And when we ask them and we poll them, where have you learned your skills? Has it been through trial and error? Has it been through, dedicated marketing activities? Is it what we find is 85% of the supplier side are learning through trial and error. So they learn the marketing skill sets on the job. If we go out to the partner base, you're going to find that number is going to be at 99.99%, right? So, it's going to be often that they're just doing what's in front of them. They're not necessarily staying up to date on the latest techniques, and they just don't have the capability, whether it be the time to focus on it or the resources to support modern marketing techniques. What we recommend then is that from a supplier perspective to make sure that MDF and co-op funds have the highest propensity for success, the strongest potential for ROI, is to predefine for your partners prescriptive marketing programs. Define out for them, specific campaigns that lead to higher success rates. Define those very clearly. Have a very defined cost structure, duration, so the partners can understand what the investment of time is in order to deliver against these. Also be very clear about what's included, what you provide to them, whether that be also supported by a third-party service vendor who's an expert in this area. And then finally, what they can expect for the results. Is this something that the partner is focused on, something that they can take advantage of that meets their goals and objectives?
Yeah, Kathy, I think this is a really nice way to lay it out. We have these conversations with every single client, every single prospect. It's on the tip of everyone's tongue how to make this happen. And once again, I go back, we'll probably say the buyer's journey 50 times today, right? Simply because it just becomes so relevant. If I look, I think it's fascinating. If I take a look at going into the details on something like this and actually look at what are those pre-planned campaigns and juxtapose that with maybe even the conversation that we're having 2 years ago, the digital marketing side has just exploded, right? And as it has exploded, there's no question the partners haven't changed hardly at all, right? So the requirements have gone completely in one direction, and it really has created either a void or an opportunity, depending on how a vendor would look at it, right?
Right. And one of the things we talked about just a moment ago when we looked at some of the common challenges is when we looked at the complexity of the process, if as a supplier you've defined campaigns that from the direct side of the business or working with third-party service agencies have the highest propensity for success, those are things you can potentially package up and pre-approve, right? So you don't sit in sort of the languishing process of having partners have to define for themselves and do proposal-based planning.
Right.
Again, they're not modern experts. They're not marketing leaders in most cases. And so leaving that up to their device is not going to be best for anyone.
Yeah, and I think as we go through this, we'll talk about proposal-based. And I think one of the keys of Kathy's research and what we've seen too is that there's going to be a blend. We're not going to sit in here and advocate that any of the incentives that we're going to cover or that people have been talking about get thrown out. I think the big picture piece that we've been talking about is how do you create a great blend, right? And this becomes a piece of it.
So one of the other things that we spend time, again, when we talk to our clients, when we're looking at, evaluating their current programs and really looking at where to focus for future success, we really look at the definition and measurement of that success. So being very clear up front and defining what the marketing activity or KPIs are, the minimum ROI metrics. Again, a lot of companies we find are still looking purely at proof of performance, right, to meet the contractual obligations required from a regulatory perspective. But that doesn't always give you what you need in terms of to evaluate the success of the program so you can start investing and promoting those programs that have the highest historical ROI and start being predictive in your future spend and return. So some things to think about here is mapping the activity to the ROI metrics, but also thinking out further beyond click-through rates or registration rates to actual sales metrics, whether it be lead status or closed-won rates.
Yeah, I think the bar is getting raised here, no question about it. Historically, as an MDF company, we've been doing MDF for 30 years. We're doing incentives, spiffs and rebates for 15 years. We spent a lot of time in those minimum ROI metrics because that's where everybody played on the MDF side. And I know you mentioned this too, and we surely see it, is that those additional metrics, the MQLs, the SQLs, have risen to the top of the conversation. I was meeting with a Fortune 500 VP, company VP 2 months ago, and her comments to me were, if I don't get the measurement piece right on this, I won't have a job in a year. They're investing in third-party efforts and in CMMs, TPMAs, in really building out the pre-planned campaigns, in the MDF dollars being spent the right way. So they're putting a lot into it. She's going to be held accountable to making sure what they're measuring, getting out of it right.
Yeah, and we're seeing that more and more. Not only is the company requiring that, it used to be that the channel wasn't expected to produce the same type of measurement results, but more importantly, it's finding out from being able to track that data whether or not things are actually falling through. Right? Are things falling through the cracks when it goes from a lead to a qualified lead to a sales qualified to an opportunity? If you're not tracking that data, then you're not able to really diagnose if there's a challenge there, something you need to fix.
Sure. I mean, I guess when you look at it, that's a great place to be, right? With all this pressure and accountability, to be able to get in and really dive in and see not only where you're doing right, but where you're falling down is absolutely critical. I agree.
So just sort of in a summary, some things to think about. When we talk to our clients, again, focus specifically on sort of historically where a lot of companies have spent their time on incentives as an umbrella is around MDF and co-op. One of the things I often say in these conversations is let's talk about your program goals. What problem are you trying to solve? Because be very clear about that, document it so that you can track your progress and success against those individual goals. Sometimes it's actually around the utilization of these programs. Perhaps the partners just aren't utilizing their funds. We see that a lot. We see that pretty commonly. It might be on, if they are utilizing the funds, they're not seeing an ROI, right? They're just not seeing the return on investment that you would expect to see for those dollars that are spent. It actually might be on the experience of the partner. The partners might be dissatisfied with the process, and it might be arduous for them. And so really making sure if that's an area of focus, if that's one of the goals for the change or a modification, to be clear about that, define that. And then finally making sure there's a clear understanding of the performance reporting measurement. Is this something they have or not? Another area we talked to them about and we want to make sure they consider and keep in mind is that they're keeping track of the compliance regulatory requirements related depending on the fund type and how those funds are generated. So, that might involve different regulatory requirements, different accounting principles. So it's something that they need to make sure they're considering and working with companies like CCI to help monitor that process. And finally, what we often do is really talk about, okay, let's talk about your program goals. Let's look at the compliance requirements, but let's think about best practices. How do you take this forward? One of those is our Serious Decisions Fast Tracking Model. It's actually a multi-step process that really helps to improve the experience as well as to define a very strong ROI result. But two of those components within that are making sure you understand the partner as well as their go-to-market and mapping the right programs to that and being very specific, as we introduced before, doing prescriptive-based programs and menu-based plays. It's also about thinking about leveraging the power of channel technologies. And again, these are not just a single program, but perhaps looking at PRM solutions, integration with CMM or through partner marketing, or even channel incentive management like CCI and the other vendors in that space. Another critical area is around services marketplace. As we've talked about, one of the key elements in this area is in terms of a challenge is that most partners don't have marketing excellence or capabilities or even the resources to really manage some of the more successful marketing campaigns. Having a third-party service vendor provide that through and have that be funded through the MDF or co-op dollars is actually a very important best practice. It also allows you to garner more information in terms of the return on investment. They actually tend to have the tracking mechanisms to be able to track that data and provide that to the supplier. And finally, I think where we're going to spend our time in the rest of the conversation is really looking beyond MDF and co-op, thinking about the future of incentives expanding, and we'll talk about what that is and why we think that's important.
It's a great process, and as I look at this, it makes me think about what our process is with most of our clients. Once again, since we've been doing MDF for so long, we've always talked about the program goals, right? And we sat down, and it's just a piece of part of our process on working with our clients to make their MDF incentives successful. The compliance piece, I've seen quite a bit of increase in dialogue around that. Every single client that we have or prospect, we end up having a financial best practices conversation. And I think it's really interesting whether someone's changing their program or coming on board as a new client, they're pulling finance in earlier and earlier to get through that compliance piece because it really is critical. And the ability to really define and differentiate between contra and marketing expense, we go pretty deep with folks around that, into that. There's a lot of gray areas around that, and I think it's becoming really, really relevant, not only to be able to make sure that they're providing the marketing activities that they really want to be able to drive, but to success, but to make sure that they're getting from the right budgets and from the accounting perspective it works well. But there's no question that all of this leads to the best practices. And from my perspective, I think this is a great list. To me, the one thing that I would add to this is I think all four of the pieces that you have up here tie together. And I think they have to look at doing all of these versus maybe focusing on just one. If you can pull all of these together, you're definitely going to create some synergies, right? And I think that's a key to really getting the most out of whatever programs that you're running.
Yeah, Stu, and that's a wonderful point. The reality is it does take making sure that you're sort of aligning the right processes across all of these areas. Otherwise, again, you're going to have a critical failure rate.
Right, and I think that you have to step through this. I like the way that you had that laid out into those three buckets. I know we didn't go, hey, this is step 1, step 2, and step 3. But if you try to do all the best practices piece, but you haven't really dotted your I's and crossed your T's on the compliance piece, you're going to fall down somewhere. Or if you haven't gotten your program goals and objectives bought off both externally and internally, you're going to fall down somewhere. So I do think there's a cumulative effect walking through that 1, 2, 3 process.
Great. So I think what we're going to do now is then sort of shift our focus a little bit towards the future, really look at what we're seeing from an analyst perspective around incentives. And again, from a serious decisions standpoint, we look at incentives as sort of a large umbrella. And if we look historically, though, what we've seen is that for the most part, channel incentives have been sort of viewed through the rearview mirror, really a look back, right? So you're rewarding past behavior. Primarily, when you look at co-op, MDF funds, rebates, and spiffs, those are actually usually tied to production of revenue, right? So it's actually rewarding behavior that's already happened, not necessarily motivating new behaviors. And so, you know, when we talk about expanding universe of incentives, what we're really looking at here is thinking not only about the types of programs that have been historically in place, again, co-op, market development funds, perhaps rebates or spiffs, but also starting to think about additional funding types, whether it be launch funds or some companies call those business development funds, those that are forward-looking, right, investing before the partner has proven their revenue potential, and then points-based rewards. And I think this is a critical area that we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about today, whether that be around cash-based rewards, non-monetary, or even gamification. But I think that's an area, and you know, one of the areas that I just want to call out here is that we don't necessarily think that you should invest in just one fund type. It should really be a blend of a few.
Yeah, I think this is a great slide. I think this is the kind of slide people are looking for to quantify and qualify all the incentives that people have out there and looking at the terminology. I think it's very, very timely and very, very relevant. Historically, maybe we had a client who was running a co-op and an MDF program. And then somewhere else, somebody else in an organization was running some sort of spiff program. It maybe even wasn't even tied in together. And what we're seeing now is a real drive to tear down silos, pull everything together, try to create at least a semblance of a platform, whether it's on a single platform or integrations, right, of all these pieces together. So for us, it's not uncommon now to have a conversation with a client who's running a co-op program, even though no one uses the word co-op, I swear. No one says co-op, even though they're calling it MDF, even though it's a contractually obligated program.
You know, Stephen, I love that because every single conversation I have, it's always titled MDF.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what sits on my calendar. It's an MDF call. We want to talk to you about MDF best practices. The first question I ask is let's talk about how those funds are generated. Yeah. Because more often than not, it's actually not an MDF conversation.
It's accrual based, and if it's contractual, I'm sorry, that is technically that's a co-op program. but we have folks that are running a co-op program, and there are definitely places for that. Large clients or people that are large partners, people you want to keep on board. It's maybe even from a loyalty perspective. And then maybe an MDF, and that MDF could be run at a different couple levels. We can run an MDF that's accrual based. See a lot of people doing that. They want the MDF activities for business development, but they're trying to figure out how do I allocate those dollars, right? So they do it accrual based. And then we see a smaller percentage, but a very, very large growth towards MDF that's truly proposal based. And then that's getting away from being lagging, right? And that's enablement. That's actually moving towards preparing people to sell well. So we could see a co-op, an MDF, multiple MDFs, maybe even we have a lot of folks who run a joint marketing planner, and that's just a way of taking individual PAs and an MDF and grouping them into a campaign. So that's 4 programs running under an MDF auspice there. And then now the smart folks, I think, are really then tying in, okay, I've got that, and maybe I was running a rebate that was volume-based, and we were just writing a check every quarter, which we could have a whole meeting on.
Yes,
should it be writing, $20 million worth of just quarterly rebates versus just calling it a price adjustment? And they're coming in and saying, okay, we want to do value rebates as well. We want to start having the partners have some skin in the game on this, right? And we're fine with running a rebate, but we want even some basic gamification around that. We want some goals, we want some targets. We'll start to try that in together. And then they're even taking the spiff, which was historically, you and I've talked about a lot about this, it was the purview of a sales guy. Hey, here's a spiff. We need to move a product at the end of a quarter. Here it is. We run a spiff. And now we're seeing, I know you're going to talk about that a lot when we get into personas. We're seeing a real drive towards rewarding folks like SEs, especially in the technical sale. So now and then on top of that, their vendor would say, I would like a points-based system that's going to reward someone for staying with me from a loyalty perspective. So now we're literally having a conversation about 6 different or 7 different programs all trying to run together from a common goal.
Right. And I think, so we're looked at the different program types. I think another thing to look at is the expanding universe of the goals. And so, sort of historically where you might see some goals in terms of how funds have been established, it maybe have been around revenue performance, perhaps around deal registration or even lead reporting. But starting to think about some other goals based on your company structure, based on your strategic goals, or even your channel specific goals. Some of the areas that we see as being very effective is perhaps around onboarding velocity. From a serious decision standpoint, when we see companies that bring in new partners that they haven't been onboarding within a very specific, distinct time frame, whether that be 30, 60, 90 days, 90 is a little late, if they don't go through that within a concentrated time frame, they actually don't perform. And so you actually need to continue to market to that partner. You need to continue to drive them towards an onboarding experience. Until they get through that, we don't start seeing performance at the level that you should. And so putting incentives in place to get the partner to onboard with a velocity that's ideal for the business is a really interesting way to layer some incentives. Perhaps also looking at engagement. We find sometimes that your partners might start losing focus, not engaging as much with the programs and the opportunities that you provide to them. You can layer incentives in that regard if you choose to. 2 other areas that we're seeing a lot of focus around lately is around cloud transformation. Really expecting partners to transform their business model is a huge undertaking for them. A lot of companies making this transition themselves as a supplier are expecting their partners to follow suit. To do that, we've seen some effectively used different types of incentives to support that. Or even as critical for success of any partner business is going to be around customer success. So there might be incentives around minimum customer satisfaction scores, perhaps around different customer loyalty or retention programs or renewal rates. But also think about if you're trying to drive your partners to become more modern marketers, perhaps take on digital marketing or social leadership capabilities. Again, think about what your goals are from a strategic standpoint. Perhaps you have an emerging technologies growth goal within the business, or even on a channel-specific standpoint. Are you trying to grow your partners to actually mature their business model in a way where they're more partner-led in the marketing? If so, make sure you're lining the right activity in terms of incentives to support that and motivate that behavior.
I can't help but look at this from a supplier's perspective, and I think you're spot on. But I think one of the things that comes out of this for me as the listeners here and vendors in general, their expectations of suppliers like us has to go up. But if we can't together figure out a way to simply do this, we've just created a bunch of mishmash, right? Because you just mentioned about 10 different things, and they're all incredibly valid. But I think the vendors out there should be expecting their suppliers they work with, whether it's us or other folks out there, to be delivering systems that have created more simplicity for both the partner and for them as well. I think it's absolutely paramount that not only just integration, but that the systems, whether it's wisdom-driven or whatever it is, need to get a lot easier to use.
Well, and I wouldn't agree more. I mean, the reality is the other thing I would want to make note of is that I wouldn't recommend over-incenting your partners. With too many things in front of them, they lose focus.
Yep.
Being very clear about, that's why I say align it to your goals, right?
Yep.
So when we have clients that come to us and say, okay, we have this critical goal, we need to transform our partners, we have this strategic goal we want to do within 12 to 24 months.
Right.
Leverage your incentives in that place. And so think about that as well, but you're right, it has to be done in such a way that, for example, a lot of these should have triggers or tracking based on the systems that the partners are engaging in, whether that be on the PRM or channel marketing management or through partner marketing side, and then integrating with channel incentive management platforms as well to be able to monitor that and monetize it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the interesting piece, and you're going to point this out as you go into the personas, and also as you start talking a little bit about where are you following your incentives, route to market, what are you really looking at? You can very easily take something real simple and actually think from my objective perspective, I have it really lined out and it's real simple. But then if you look at 3 different personas at a partner against 4 different tiers of partners, right, against 3 different go-to-route strategies, okay, now I think it's like 3 to 3 to 3, right? We just created, it could be 20 different items you have there. So you could still have a very simple objective and you need systems and measurements and integrations that can pull all of it. This is not a sales pitch because there's a lot of other vendors out there that play in an ecosystem, right? CCI focuses on, I think, one specific area. The ecosystem is what I'm talking about, and pulling all those pieces together so that you can manage all that, because I do think you need to be able to break it down that way.
So one of the things that we like, we point out to partners as we work through this process with them and support them in this effort, is that to really think about motivating your partner's behavior, right? And so there's two things I want to point out here. One is sort of historically a lot of reward programs, a lot of marketing funds, incentive funds have been focused on, as I mentioned earlier, lagging indicators. So those are things that are past performance, right? Really rewarding partners based on what they've already accomplished, as opposed to putting incentives in place that actually we would term leading indicators, so driving towards and motivating them, rewarding for future incentive opportunities. And the other thing I want to point out is starting to think about who you're going to incent. Are you going to incent the partner as an entity, or to change the behavior, actually motivate the right activity within the partner base to actually motivate a change or to drive them towards growth goals? Is that actually need to be done at the individual level, what we would call a persona level, or should that be done at a team or group level? So just two things to think about when you look about expanding and incenting your partners, starting to think about making sure there's a blend between lag and leading indicators, and really start thinking about who you're trying to motivate, what the right entity is to motivate in terms of where to focus your energy.
I think the interesting piece on this one would be, and you and I have had conversations about this, is what is MDF? What really is MDF? I mean, terminology-wise, it's Market Development Fund, right? So we've had this conversation where we've talked about, we have folks who have actually taken that, where traditionally it'd be a lagging indicator, and have moved it into the leading indicator piece, right? And they really created a subset of MDF. I think it's pretty smart. I think it all plays into the success of the blend.
So as I mentioned, one of the things that we're recommending is that companies think about who they're incenting. But I want to step back a little bit. One of the foundational areas that we spend a lot of time with our clients on is really talking about their routes to market. So what partner types do they invest in? What partner types are part of their ecosystem of channel? And thinking about that, define specifically what partners are you trying to incent and motivate or reward? And then at a sub-level, think about what are the personas. When we talk about personas, those are the roles or functions within that partner. Each one of them plays a different important role in that business, driving it forward. And when we go to actually looking at this, there are certain personas that are more prevalent and more relevant to the success of your channel relationship with them and your business opportunity with them than others. For example, if you look at what you would see from a service provider standpoint, it's going to be one segment of personas that you're going to engage in with the most, that you might want to build incentives around. Whereas you're looking at an OEM or ISV, you'll see that the technical box there has a little asterisk, because that might actually be an engineering team or a development team, not necessarily a pre or post-sales technical resource or a subject matter expert.
Yeah, no question about it. Actually, the majority of incentives that have been driven, new incentives that we've seen over the past 18 months, have been around SEs, whether it's something from a learning module. It's not even just about certifications anymore, white papers, all business practices that the SE is driving. I think you mentioned it earlier that we're definitely seeing that the SE is a bigger influencer in these technical sales, right? They're playing a bigger role. And they're also getting backed by the internal individuals at the vendor themselves. There's just this real team effort, starting with the vendor support group, the CAMs, the PAMs, the SEs there that are helping the SEs or the partners that are then supporting the sales guy.
Yeah, what we've found is that for, again, specifically in technical offerings, the SE actually tends to have a higher impact on the sales experience, as well as if you're looking at thought leadership or social leadership, they tend to have the right voice, right? Because they're very much the peer to the buyer. So you look at the buyer's journey, their involvement, incentives around that persona is critical, could actually have a higher impact on sales. The other great thing to think about is they're usually not as frequently rewarded. So the mind share of that persona is not as constantly competed against. For example, sales teams tend to get highly motivated in terms of incentives and programs put in garnered toward them. The SE doesn't tend to have the same amount of focus around them. Also think about if you're expecting your partners or looking for your partners to make a change in terms of perhaps become more modern marketers, leading marketing, partner-led marketing efforts, think about the marketing persona as somebody to incent. Also, when you think about customer success, renewal rates, customer excellence, customer experience, that might be the post-sales support or the customer success type persona. So again, really thinking about what the corporate goals are, what your channel goals are, and then making sure you're laying the right incentives to support that.
Oh, absolutely, because I even think the buyer, once again, we said the buyer's journey, I think we've said it less than 20 times, so it's not, we haven't gotten penalized for that yet. But the reality is, in the buyer's journey, when the ultimate customer is more prepared when they're coming to that partner, they're looking for validation and not so much information. And it's created, that salesperson in that partner environment has to be either a marketing person as well or have good marketing support to make them be able to offer an ROI example, a case study. It's not speeds and feeds anymore. It's risk mitigation and business continuity. I mean, it's a completely different sale in a lot of instances. And I think there's a lot that can be done to either get the marketing folks at a partner and the sales folks to be tied together, or to make that individual, depending on the size, right? Some of these guys are pretty small, to be able to know where to go and what to get and how to present what needs to be presented to the ultimate buyer.
And Stephen, that's so true. One of the things that we do is, we talked about this a little bit about looking at different considerations when you look at your incentive strategy. One of them really is to think about the persona, really focus very clearly at who you're trying to motivate, whether, again, it's the partner or an individual or a group within that partner base. Also, thinking about perhaps layering it based on the journey stages. So this is Serious Decisions partner journey stages indicated here. The ones in green are the post-commitment stage, so once they become a partner, post-recruitment. And there might be, as we mentioned, some incentives you want to put in place around onboarding velocity, perhaps their later stage around specializations, or even business planning or QBR achievement, or engagement with programs. So thinking about if you have specific goals around perhaps new partners or onboarding within a certain desired time frame, or getting more partners to become specialized, if that's one of the channel goals that you've established. Again, really being very clear about where that plays into the 6 journey stage focus can be an important part of your strategy.
Yeah, we have a lot of clients who have growing channels, and the velocity piece comes up quite often. And I agree with you. It's the velocity is so important to not only get them to accelerate to success. A lot of the questions are, what are those success steps as they move through it? It's great to get from point A to point D, but did we do the right things through that as well to make sure that we're not only progressing, but we're progressing as well as possible? And I don't know about you, I've seen a lot of creativity about what those incentives would be. It doesn't mean giving them a bunch of dollars. I guess it depends on who the persona is as you're moving through that. But we see a lot of things like vendor dollars that can be exchanged for even more enablement capabilities, whether that's training or assistance from an SE from the vendor, or whatever it is that helps that partner prepare to sell, and to sell at high margins with success from and customer satisfaction from the end user.
Yeah, and if you look at, so you see each one of those sort of, I'll call them swim lanes of all the different personas, including the partners and entity, we would have a different map, a different journey stage on the investment enablement, as well as the productivity for each one of those, where they're involved in that journey process, as opposed to, as well as what's necessary to motivate them through and to encourage them through those gating factors.
Well, and a shameless plug for Serious Decisions. I mean, you guys have great data, and you have really good studies and white papers out there. And so I highly recommend, if someone's interested, check out Serious Decisions if you're not already working with those guys. And just fabulous content that really goes in deep on this. Sorry, shameless plug. But
Thank you, I appreciate it. So, we've talked about buyer's journey a couple times, and now you're going to see it on the screen. Another thing to think about is think about the continuum of the pre and post sales experience that the partners are extending to prospects and customers. And think about mapping incentives, again, depending on where your growth goals are in that relationship. When you look at pre-sales, Serious Decisions has a buyer's journey that really maps out 3 distinct stages of the buyer's experience. And then once they become a customer, there are 4 distinct stages when we look at a customer lifecycle. This is an area we're spending a lot of time with clients on these days on both sides of this continuum, because it's a really critical area for partners to build new leads, net new logos, net new business, as well as to maintain and retain their existing customer base. Critical cloud, critical for all partner types. When we talk to most partners, in fact, I was at a partner advisory board not too long ago, and we were looking at both of these sides of the house in terms of buyer's journey and customer lifecycle and best practices around each. And when I went around the room to the 30 partners present, the partner owners, there was no one in the room that had less than 80% of their business was through existing customers. So it's such a large part of their business capability and their revenue. So that customer lifecycle is really critical. And so thinking about that, you might want to look at, again, per the persona or focus area, whether it be partners or the individuals. And the pre-sales effort, it might be around what the partner's doing in terms of thought leadership or demand creation programs. It might be around their lead development or maturation process, as well as adhering to SLAs or doing deal registration, right? Those are the types of incentives you might want to focus there if that's an area of critical need for the business. When you're looking at the customer lifecycle, there's a number of things that you can incent or build processes around or motivate, and that could be around engagement with the customer, marketing to customers. Again, 80% of their business is through existing customers. It might not be the supplier's customer. It might just be the partner's customer. So focusing them on marketing to their customers your solutions, it's a different type of marketing. Right?
Yeah, it really is. And the place that we've had some interesting conversations, a lot of interesting conversations lately, is as vendors are adding either a cloud service or moving all the way to cloud or just moving towards that recurring revenue cloud side, and they haven't been able to go to the stockpile of available cloud partners that are over on 3rd and D Street, right? I mean, it's like, where do you find those guys? A lot of them have had to move their existing partners over. There's some really interesting data out there on whether that's actually already been done or not and whether it's capable of moving some of these guys. But a lot of the guys that have been moved over that were traditional guys, and when they get over into that recurring revenue cloud space, it's not natural for them to look at retention in the same way. So I think there's a lot of discussion on how do we take these old school folks and work with them to understand what it's going to take so that they can sell inside of a walled garden, right?
Well, and the interesting thing is we spend a lot of time with our clients in this, helping to map out from a supplier's perspective their customer life cycle, and then helping them to map it out for their partners. So their partners can extend that through, because when you're looking at the life cycle, the majority of that effort is not selling. Right, it's supporting and providing value and enabling them to customers.
It is selling,
but your persona,
the
persona you want to do a lot of that engagement is not your sales rep.
Yeah, but so this is where what Larry Ellison said: you're either in sales or you support sales, right? And I think it's pretty funny that is just really becoming true. That whole organization is a personification of a quote sales. Sales is not the bad word here, right? This is what we all are working together for in an organization. Once again, so that they can build that recurring revenue. I was just tongue-in-cheek.
So we've gone through a lot of information today. We started really by looking at, MDF and co-op programs historically and some best practices, as well as some things to consider as if you're looking at your programs today and you want to optimize those. We also sort of started talking about looking at a broader universe of channel incentives and really thinking about new ways to expand that. And that really thinking about it by looking both, again, as I indicated, at lagging and leading indicators. So that leading indicator area is usually a greenfield for most suppliers. They haven't done this yet, or if they have, they just started to. So really follow best practice in that, see what's working well. Also looking at the optimal mix. What I get a little nervous about is when they say, okay, we're not going to do co-op or MDF anymore. We just want to purely do incentives. That's not the right recommendation, right? You want to have a blended program. There's a value in the different funding types, but also thinking about defining those based on your corporate goals or your channel-specific goals. Is it around recruitment? Is it around increasing the productivity of existing partners and making sure that you're aligning those incentives appropriately? And then finally, a number of things you want to look at when you're developing and strategizing on this. It's really thinking about it from a partner type, even a partner tier. And we didn't talk about that much, but these are going to be different based on tier. You might only make some of these programs available for your top 2 tiers or your top tier. Look at the persona. Think about the journey stages that your partner may be in and how you might want to motivate behavior to move them through those quickly, as well as really thinking about aligning if you're really focused on that new business and or increasing the value of current customers, lifetime value of current customers. Think about both the pre and post sales efforts of those partners and incenting those and rewarding those behaviors appropriately.
All right, Kathy, thank you. Really appreciate you coming in. Have a lot of respect for the research you guys do and your guys' analysis. So I really appreciate you taking some time. So folks, we're going to open it up a little bit to Q&A here. We're glad to take a few questions. We got a little bit of time left. And then also, if you would like to reach Kathy, we've got your Twitter handle here, so please feel free to reach out to her or myself as well.
Great. We have a number of questions. We'll get through as many as we can in the time remaining. First one is, how difficult is it to integrate incentives with channel marketing agencies, and how expensive is it?
Kathy, do you want do you want me to start on that one? Do you want to?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, right. Since we have this conversation on almost a daily basis, it depends. One of my mentors in this space got me saying it depends, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It depends on what someone's trying to achieve. Kathy and I, we were actually talking about this. Kathy and I were actually talking about this earlier. It depends on what systems a company is using and which CMM or TPMA that they're looking to do business with. The expectations should be pretty simple. We've all evolved enough with standard APIs out there that it should be relatively simple to do this. What we've been doing at CCI for years is not rocket science on the MDF. The data that most people want from a platform like ours to be tied into either their CRM or their TPMA is pretty straightforward. And the TPMAs have done a really good job of understanding what's out there, what needs to be pulled into their system basically that's being spent, so that then the vendor, yourself, can then look at it and go, all right, here's what I'm spending and this is what the results I'm getting. And the results I'm getting from an independent third party are really valid, right? And I think that's the real key to that. So the costs have come way down. It's gotten a lot simpler. You should expect to be able to stand something up in a relatively short period of time. A lot of our clients, what they would do if they're a new client coming on board, would get their MDF program up and then maybe do a phase 2 in the second 60 days or so and really get that thing going. So it should be pretty straightforward.
Well, and we really see this as a trend that we're going to see more and more of, not only from a need from the marketplace, but also the ability for these organizations to be able to integrate their platforms, right? I think that's critical. And when you look at the simplification, I would really look at it from two lenses. One is how simple it is for the partners to use. How clear is it to the partners of what's available to them? What's that process look like? What's their experience from a usability standpoint? Right. The other area is on the supplier side, right? How easy is it for them to set these programs up? And then what is the reporting and measurement capability? Is it providing them in, guidance, intellectual guidance and data-driven insights as to where they should stand up more programs or which type of incentives are actually having an impact on their business? And so totally agree that this is something that should be done and is continuing to see more and more of.
Well, I think the points you just made are the value, right? That's the value statement. And one of the things when someone asks how simple it is, you've got to sell this internally, right? Because you're going to have to pull in your IT group, you're going to have to pull in resources, and this is going to take different departments coming together too, especially in the larger tier ones. You're going to have completely separate organizations that maybe run the marketing, and then a different organization would run the ops side of it, right? And they're going to have to talk together and figure out how to pull these pieces together. Yeah, so I think that's obviously the internal justification.
Yeah, fantastic.
We have time, I think, for one more question. So if we don't get to your question, please email us and we will contact you individually. But let's do one more question while we have a couple of minutes. For companies considering broadening their incentive offerings for partners, how do you recommend they get started?
I'll start on that one, and Stephen, if you have something to add, I welcome you to join as well in the response. I mentioned it a few times, but I really think the important thing to do is to step back and look at what are you trying to solve. What problem you're trying to solve. If you're looking at like in a current MDF or co-op program, again, where is it broken, or what are you trying to optimize? If you're thinking about expanding to include other incentives, which we recommend as a best practice and definitely as a trend we're going to continue to see, it's about making sure you understand what behavior you're trying to motivate or reward, right? So start there. I would not recommend you do everything, right? So be very specific. If you have top 3 channel goals for the year, think about how your incentives can help to motivate and actually reward that activity. And so be very structured in that purpose.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I would add to that is have systems that allow you to track this and then really look at the measurements, because as you start to expand, as you said, there's a reason for doing this. You want to be able to measure the results, right? So this is about ROI individually across each one, and how to really justify what you're doing, to learn from what you're doing, so that you can take the positive and add to it, and then as we talked about, find the things that are challenging and remove them. But it really is going to be about, how do I measure it, and then how do I share that measurement easily?
Well, it's so interesting you mentioned that. We didn't talk about this much, but just as a sort of a final thought process is when you look at the measurement, there's, a couple things that I think are really valuable and incredibly powerful there. One is it allows you to get insight as to what your future results might be, right? Once you start getting some metrics that have a little bit of predictability to it, you can declare, if we spend this amount of money, then we'll see this result. It can help build out a pipeline, right? And that's something you don't necessarily always have the opportunity to see in the channel. So again, capturing that data, evaluating that data is absolutely essential. The other thing is that you can help motivate partners by providing some marketing to them the success of these programs. We find a lot of times that partners aren't leveraging these funds, and there's a sense of, okay, we want the partners to do more. Why aren't they? Well, market it to them. Show them what the investment has been. Show them how other partners have succeeded and what the ROI of their investment has been in terms of spending those funds in the right places or leveraging those incentives in the right regard.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think that another tie into that is as you dig deeper into what an ROI is, and we could have a whole webinar on that, is to move further up that sales pipeline and have more visibility further up so you can make adjustments. I think what so many folks are finding out is they spent these dollars and they ran these programs, and as you said, they were using lagging indicators for even for measurement. I'm sorry, sales is a lagging indicator, right? You can't make a change quickly once you've already seen what's taking place. And the goals that we're seeing is to use these programs and to get better measurements, whether it's going all the way up to the where in that lead process, right? What are the partners doing from follow-up timeliness, right? What are some results of that all the way to the deal registration or whatever piece you want to look at that. I think that's a key piece of that.
Oh, critical. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We will have a recording of this webinar along with the slide presentation available on the CCI website. And for those of you that pre-registered, we will email it links to everybody so you'll have that in your inbox by the end of the week. Thanks again, and we will talk to you next time.